Good evening, everyone. My name is Jackson Miller, and I'm a senior here at Gallatin. So, the vast scale and speed of the wealth accumulation that has happened on the other side of the world in China has completely enamored the West. I mean, the whole act of China watching has been revived as this new spectator sport. And this allure of China as a place of massive social and economic change is very much justified. I mean, within 3 decades, for instance, entirely new urban systems have formed, and with these have arisen entirely new social strata in Chinese society. The images behind me are the opening scenes of the fantastic documentary Last Train Home. The vast majority of these people are rural to urban labor migrants, and this class in China numbers close to 300 million people, representing the largest migration in human history. And it is the proliferation of this group in particular that has informed the core of my concentration here at Gallatin. So, this climate of massive social and economic change has, naturally very much molded approaches to research on contemporary China. Specifically, in light of, all this change and the leadership transition among the upper echelons of the Chinese Communist Party that happened last November, much research has tailored toward grappling with questions of the potential for political change, or specifically, the political vulnerability of the Chinese Communist Party. One pervading question that links recent publications from fields of academia and East Asian studies to financial institutions that do business in China goes something like, what does the CCP need to do? What policy actions should they pursue in order to maintain their authority over Chinese society? And I find this question incredibly interesting because it assumes that, this loss of legitimacy is inevitable, unless perhaps some measure of political liberalization sort of corresponds with all this, free market, woo-ha, whatever, that is occurring on the ground. And I want to delve into that a little bit further. What truly lies at this crux of this perception of the Communist Party constantly at siege? It's constantly threatened. And so one great way to start is by simply examining the title or the label of China's market-oriented economic reforms, the reform and opening of China. Because the dynamics implied by these policies, or by this label itself, is incredibly interesting because as China opens herself up or exposes herself to Western markets, China becomes a passive recipient to change. China does not influence, but rather is influenced by Western goods, Western markets, and even Western ideas of society. And so any dramatic change that might arise in China as a result of these policies carry with them a tacitly Western essence, because it is solely the Western markets that are the active change makers in China, not necessarily the Chinese that are just passively receiving the change. And so hopefully this framework that is very easy to slip into, hopefully this framework highlights to all the importance of challenging and reframing this very Eurocentric and sort of westernized narrative of development that seems to be imposed on China and is commonly imposed on other non-Western societies. And so frankly, returning to this initial perception of the Chinese Communist Party under siege, well, I want to question that at its core and frankly ask, does this threat to legitimacy even exist? And I gotta tell you, y'all, I really don't think so. I really don't. And so to do this, I want to highlight 2 key strategies employed by the Communist Party that not only legitimize its policymaking processes, but also insulate this institution from almost any substantial challenge to power. Now, when asked by fellow politicians, how can a communist regime, or a supposedly communist regime, promote such capitalist policy like the reform and opening? Former President Deng Xiaoping, who is often credited as the author of these policies, he employed the power of the first strategy that I'd like to highlight today, and that is the power of framing in policymaking. And so what Deng Xiaoping did in this particular circumstance is that he linked 2 ostensibly opposite systems together. You have capitalism on the one hand and you have communism on the other, and he linked them together as part of one singular broader narrative of Mao's communist revolution. And he did this by highlighting a very unique tension that, according to him, existed between this advanced socialist mindset the virtual lack of class structures in Chinese society at the time, and these backward or primitive production models. And so what Deng did is that he highlighted the need to elevate these models of production so that China may accumulate the capital necessary to realize Mao's communist utopia. And so it is in this fashion that Deng legitimized the introduction of capitalism in a China that grounds its national identity so deeply in a communist revolution. And this feat should not be overlooked. Now, the second strategy that I would like to highlight today is the CCP's fashioning of a dualistic nature or authority of law. And so this is split among the national and the local levels. Now, I'm only going to give you guys like a brief introduction of this, but on the most basic level, what this entails is that the national CCP government apparatus, whatever you want to call it, they possess the capacity to promulgate decrees on a variety of issues, whether that may entail human rights or, coming off of my concentration, like labor laws or education standards or social welfare. The national government has this capacity to promulgate. However, the limitations of this lie in that it is almost exclusively the responsibility of the local governments to implement these reforms. So whenever a discrepancy does arise between what the national government says and what the local governments may or may not deliver to their constituents, depending on if various incentives lie or exist, disgruntled or marginalized groups will not direct their attention at the national structure. Rather, they will focus their efforts on those responsible or toward those responsible for implementing those reforms. And so these episodes of social unrest become geographically pocketed. They become contained along the lines of geography. Now, I'm not here to tell you guys, where China's going to go in 3 years, or what my thoughts are, what my beliefs are about the whole political gamut that is China. I'm not trying to impose my view on you guys. But what I am trying to do, and what I will say, is that even though various international media outlets that do deal extensively with current event issues in China, even though they will focus on a variety of spectacles of social unrest, whether that might be factory protests in the Pearl River Delta in the south, or labor unrest in the East China outside of Shanghai, or even more notably, the protests that have arisen in Foxconn factories, the institution that does make Apple products. Even though the aggregation of all of these conflicts might imply this environment of a very unstable political environment, the CCP, utilizing these strategies highlighted here and various others, have proven time and again that this institution, this broader entity that is the Chinese Communist Party, amidst all this change, that they're here to stay. Thank you guys very much, and enjoy the rest of your evening.